The perfect pie pastry coming up. Hey, Chef Des coming at you from my kitchen. Let's make the perfect pie pastry. I'm going to show you how easy this really is. And whether you want to make a quiche, a pie with seasonal fruit or berries, chicken pot pie, savory, sweet, it doesn't matter. This is the perfect pastry you want to use time and time again. We're going to start off with flour. We have 5 cups of flour. We're going to add in 3 teaspoons or 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of baking powder. Those are our dry ingredients, so let's just stir that all together. Use your hands, it doesn't really matter at this point. It's just dry ingredients. My wife's grandmother first perfected this recipe, and my wife has fine-tuned it. So it's just great. We have our 1 pound of shortening. Keep it chilled in the fridge because you want everything to stay as cold as possible, okay? We'll take it out. And what I do to help cut it into the dry ingredients a little bit easier is I take that shortening and I cut it into 1/4 cup segments. This would be like a pound of butter, let's say, divided in half. There'd be a cup and a cup. There's 1/2 cup, and then there's 1/4 cups. And I just literally just place it on top of the dry ingredients. The whole pound. This is not a diet dish, folks. However, this recipe does make 4 discs. So it's enough for 2 double-crusted pies or 4 single-crusted pies, whatever you want to do. So it goes a long ways, but you need that fat in there to make it nice and tender and flaky. Now you want to avoid touching it with your hands too much. It's a little bit more melt resistant than butter, but use a pastry cutter, not your fingers. If you haven't got a pastry cutter, you can use a couple of knives, you can use some forks, and just really bust it up. You want to make sure that it's little tiny bits. You can use your fingers to clear the pastry cutter now and then. That's totally fine. We just want to avoid using our fingers as much as possible. The heat from your fingers and your hands are going to melt that a little bit. We want to try and keep it together. Again, as cold as possible through the whole process of making this pie pastry. That's probably the biggest secret I can give you. Cold temperatures, all right? And we're just gonna keep mixing this in until it looks mealy. So fine little bits of shortening all the way throughout our dry ingredients. We wanna have it nicely distributed before we go on to the next step. So take your time to do this. Now, a lot of people think, well, you're overworking it, you're gonna make it tough. Actually, incorrect. The only time you make it tough is when you add the liquid ingredients and you overwork it. When there's no liquid ingredients, you're not gonna make it tough. So go ahead and mix as much as you want. The only thing that we wanna kind of make sure of is that we don't take too long to do this because we want the shortening to stay cold. When you agitate flour and liquid, that's what makes it tough. There's no liquid added yet, so we're all good. Next ingredient, we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of butter. You might think that we have enough fat in there already. But what the butter's gonna do is gonna give it some great flavor. The shortening is for the flakiness, the butter is for the flavor. So I have the 1/4 cup of butter that I put in the freezer. We're gonna do a little trick, I'll show you this. My wife taught me this ages ago. So you take a standard cheese grater and you take your frozen 1/4 cup of butter and you grate it in. And what that does, it creates perfect little tiny bits of butter all the way throughout. And you want to create those little pockets of fat because it's going to give you incredible tenderness by having that fat distributed all over, flavor, but also there's liquid in butter. And so when this heats in the oven, you're going to have those little pockets of steam all the way throughout, which is going to give you more rise and more flakiness in your pastry as well. You may want to stop and distribute some of those frozen bits of butter so they get into the flour. We're almost there. And again, just stir that through. Trying to keep it cold, so we're not gonna do that for too long, just enough so it's thoroughly mixed. And again, you can see how mealy it is. All right, on to the next step. So we need to get 1 large BCA. And we're gonna take that, put it into a measuring cup. I'm using a 1 cup measure. I'll show you why in a minute. But this is the real nutrition of the dish. Let's be honest, right? I mean, shortening, butter, tons of flour. That 1 large BCA has 14 key nutrients, all 9 essential amino acids, and 6 grams of the highest quality protein you can get. To that large egg, we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of vinegar, all right? And I'll show you the next step here. We wanna make sure that our liquid component is perfect for this pie pastry, so it's not too wet, it's not too dry, it's just right. And how we achieve that is by going to the sink, and we use this 1 cup measure for a reason. We want to look at the 3/4 cup mark, and we want to fill this right until we reach that 3/4 cup measure with cold water. And make sure you run that so you know it's cold. Okay, again, we're trying to keep this pie pastry as cold as possible. So very carefully, I'm just going to take a second just to blend that in completely. And then go through, and what I want you to do is just drizzle it over the top, because what that does, it gets it sort of mixed all the way around, gets it started with that, because right now we're adding the liquid, we don't want to agitate this too much. So we're just gonna take a spoon and mix it until it just starts coming together. And when it's a big shaggy mess and you can't see any more liquid component, you literally just dump the whole thing on the counter. All right, you can tell by looking at it that it is not nearly mixed to bring this together at this point. But that brings us to our next step. I want you to switch utensils now to what's called a bench scraper. This is a very handy tool for working with pastry, biscuits, scones, anytime where you don't want to touch the dough with your hands too much, because again, the warmth of your hands is going to start melting the butter. So this allows you to really bring it together. And all I'm using now is just one hand to sort of help keep it contained here, right? And taking it and lifting it from the bottom, going all the way over and bringing it together. And you might think, this is not going to come together at all. It's too dry. You just need to be patient, okay? Be patient. It will come together, I promise you. As long as you've measured your flour correctly and all the dry ingredients and that water, egg, and vinegar, it's all good. It really is. And it will come together. I'm trying to resist using that second hand too much, but you do need it, okay? You do need it to help it come together. And once it's starting to get there, as you can see now, it's starting to get into that nice one big ball. I'm gonna stop using my bench scraper and just bring it together gently, because remember, we don't want to overwork this until it comes into one big ball of dough. All right, fantastic, look at that, great. Now the next step. Remember, I told you this makes 4 discs of pastry. So you have enough for 2 double-crusted pies. So what we need to do is, again, take that bench scraper and eyeball it by cutting it in half, and then cutting each of those in half to give you approximate size. You can, at this point, bust out a kitchen scale and weigh each one and adjust a little bit to make sure they're perfect. But I think we've eyeballed them pretty good here. You can tell that they are very, very tender. All right, the next thing we do, we get some plastic wrap. We want to chill these now. We've worked them enough. They are getting warm as they sit out. So we're going to take one piece of plastic wrap first, take one chunk of that dough and press it. Again, you want to work kind of carefully, and you're just pressing it. Don't really worry about the shape too much right now, but kind of make it into a round disc, roughly about a 1/2 inch thick. And then what we're gonna do is take another piece of plastic wrap, put that over top. Okay, once you have the second one on top, quickly with your hand, keep pressing it down. Now you can shape it more into that round, and you're looking for about a 1/4 inch. And now you can wrap it and seal it up. And you want to chill this for at least a 1/2 hour or longer. The other option is you can put that in the freezer, and you always have a supply of pastry dough in the freezer. Thaw it in the fridge whenever you want to use it, 24 hours or something in the fridge, and then work with it cold from the refrigerator once it's thawed. I'm going to continue with the other 3, make a stack of 4. I'll chill it in the fridge, and I'll see you back in about a 1/2 hour. All right. Got these from the fridge, they've been chilling for a while. So before we take one off of there, let's get some wax paper now. We're gonna now work with wax paper because the dough is not gonna stick to the wax paper very much. A little bit of flour, and this is how you're going to roll out your dough without it sticking to your rolling pin, without it sticking to your counter. So we'll take one of those discs out of the plastic wrap, now that it's nicely chilled, and we're gonna put it on that wax paper. We're gonna add a little bit more flour on the top, not too much. Again, we're just trying to keep it from sticking, right? Just a little dusting. And then taking another bit of wax paper over top of that. All right, And now you can take your rolling pin and carefully, I like to use, this is called a French rolling pin. I like to use this versus the one with the handles. Because you use the one with the handles, you're putting pressure here and here, not here where you want it to. So by using this one, it forces you to put your hands on the top where they should be to get the pressure you want. And this way we can manipulate the dough a little easier and more precisely. So what we're trying to do now is to make this more circular. Now is the time to shape it without working it too much. Because remember, the more you work it, the tougher it's gonna be. And we want a nice, tender pie pastry. People ask me all the time, well, how thin do you go? Well, you gotta get your pie plate. So I have my pie plate here, and what I do to test how thin I wanna go is I invert it, and I'm looking to have at least a 1/2 inch all the way around. And you can see I have a little bit there. Over here, I have a 1/2 inch, right? But I'm really lacking in some of the areas where it's not even sticking out, right? So that tells me I need to keep rolling it out, and that will give me a good bottom crust. If I want to do a fancy fluted edge all the way around, then I want to have at least 3/4 of an inch sticking out all the way around. Take your rolling pin and really roll out in the areas where you need to. And this rolling pin, again, it allows you to really manipulate the dough by moving it into the areas where you really need it very quickly and efficiently. And that way we're not overworking our pastry. Overworked pastry is gonna taste like cardboard. Well, maybe not taste like it, but have the texture of it. We don't want that. We want nice and flaky pie crust. All right, let's try that pie plate again, see what we're at. And look at that, we're at least a 1/2 inch all the way around. Maybe a little bit short on that side, but I can move it over and it's gonna be fine. See that? So we'll take it off. And you want to work fairly quick. Again, this is chilled. You want to try and keep it cold. We're going to take off the top layer, a little bit of flour. Here's the trick. We want to try and get this into here. This is very fragile, delicate. Remember, we worked really hard to not overwork this to make sure it's nice and tender. Here's what you're going to do. Take your wax paper and go like this so it's folded in half, okay? Pull back on the wax paper. Take your pie plate, get underneath the wax paper on the bottom, and try and get it as close to the halfway mark as you can. Obviously, I have to adjust mine just a little bit, and then all you're gonna do is you're going to unfold it. Now remember, your hands are warm. We've talked a lot about this. We wanna try and get it pressed in there evenly without working it too much. We want this pie pastry to remain nice and tender. Now don't panic about this. You see this? It's a little bit lower, and I got some a little bit higher over here. Don't worry about it. Just get it gently pressed into the crevices of your pie plate at the bottom. Not pressed too much, just making sure that there's no air bubbles in there. And it's all the way there. And then what we can do is we can steal some off here and just put it over here where we need it, okay? This is gonna be a great pastry crust for a one-crusted pie, like a lemon meringue or a pumpkin. And now once you've done that, you can just go through, if you want to create a little bit of a crust all the way around the edges, you can do that. Make it look a little bit more tidy. But don't panic about that kind of stuff. It's better to have a rustic looking pie that's a bit misshapen and have it nice and tender and flaky, rather than have one that looks perfect because you overworked it and it's not very tender and flaky, right? We don't want that. We want that texture. And we just call it a rustic pie if it looks a bit misshapen. We have the perfect pie pastry every single time. Now I can go ahead and make any kind of pie I want. Single-sided, double-sided. I have the recipe to follow. I have more discs that I can roll out. And you can look forward to many recipe videos coming up. We'll show you lemon meringue pie. Maybe we'll even do a quiche. Right here at bcegg.com. Check out that website for many other great recipes that are on there right now. I'm the corporate chef for BC Egg. Chef Des signing out. Where are you getting your protein from?